Hey guys, welcome to the Lunge and Lift podcast. Today we're going to be talking about the top 3 underappreciated approaches to training. These are 3 tweaks that we've seen implemented to great success and some subtle changes that could see big results in your training. So we're going to talk about heavy unilateral work, low tone, and how to minimize your programming to boost your performance. So stay tuned for all those golden nuggets. But before we get into it, don't forget to click the link in the description box below to get your 14-day free trial to Rob's strength formula, your answer to the strength and muscle building equation. A big thank you also to thetrainingstimulus.com. Please check out the website to get your free movement mechanics guide to the 3 vital principles of movement. And also thank you to ZAAGsupplements.com, our favorite daily supplement. We've been using ZAAG for a good while now, and it's a liquid gel shot delivering 29 vitamins, nootropics, and adaptogens that has us feeling dialed in for our training, but also for deep work sessions. So please use our discount code DISCLIFT50. I think there's one left at time of recording to get 50% off your 2-week trial pack. And if you miss the boat on that one, you can use the normal discount code, which is DISCLIFT20, DISCLIFT20. All right, let's get into it. Rob, underrated approaches to training.
Yeah, mate. Unilateral work, and in particular, heavy unilateral work. Saw an impressive feat of strength by Chris Speed after you've had an assessment with him, right? So you watching him do what was the split squat? It was heavy.
180 kilos.
Yeah, 180
massive.
kilos off the pins, and you're just like, yeah. I mean, it did make me think, what can I do? Like it did add that level of curiosity to me. But like, fuck, that's strong. Like he's a strong individual though. So but it shows. I'm seeing it more. I know we follow some very similar people as well. We've seen some like of the unilateral strength stuff, like Alec Blennis, like watching like popularizing essentially some unilateral work, which is obviously like, I think beyond just the unilateral work itself is the fact that it's heavy and that it's not used as like just some lightweight going through your movement pattern. And I think it can be really easy to I'd say it can be really easy to justify going like, because okay, I'm trying to feel the movement, I've got to focus on stability, I've got to focus on this and that, when actually it's like you can load up, you can get really strong at it if you choose to. But I think it's just you have to understand why are you doing the heavy unilateral work in the first place, and what are you hoping to achieve from that, and that is it the most direct path to be getting stronger. And if it's not the most direct path, is it a path that you maybe have unexplored, so you might actually get some sneaky gains?
Yeah, exactly. So for those people who didn't see Chris's, I don't know if he did it as a post or a story, I can't remember now, but Chris Speeds has been a guest on the podcast before, and he's a very accomplished weightlifter and athlete in general. And we did a muscle imbalance assessment because he had some asymmetries he wanted to look at, and he moves incredibly well overall. So we just identified some small tweaks that we needed to tap into to get him into the corners that he hasn't quite been making the most of. Let's put it like that. And for him, because he is so strong, once we taught the body how to get into those corners, we then needed to bring them up to the level of the rest of his performance, which is obviously extremely high. So the approach we settled on was to make sure he can access those mechanics, and then we just have to load them to a similar level to the rest of his training. And I think this is something that's underappreciated from a movement mechanics perspective. People see a lot of the lighter, less loaded movements and think that is movement mechanics, but movement mechanics is just movement in general. So even in a normal heavy squat, that could come under the banner of movement mechanics. And we're always just thinking about what's the end goal that we're working towards. So if we can tap into those corners that we don't quite access well enough, the goal is always to then load them up so that they can perform at the level that we want for our end result, which might be doing heavy Olympic weightlifting, for example, in which case adding load to those patterns is essential to finish that journey, to finish bridging those gaps. So there's a classic study, which I think I might have referenced about 100 episodes ago, which is a case study comparing using the step up and the back squat to improve the back squat. So they had two groups of people. They measured, I think it was a 5 rep max, but I might be wrong, in the back squat. Then for 6 weeks, one group did a back squat cycle and the other group did the same cycle in terms of reps and sets and rest and everything, but for step ups instead. And the people that did the step ups actually added more to their back squat than the people who did back squats, even though they didn't do any back squats in that cycle. And what this says to me is that in a lot of people who train a lot, if they're always just doing the same bilateral movements, there's a lot of unexplored territory or potential that isn't getting tapped into that they would do if they focused a little bit more on the unilateral stuff. And I think if you get super strong in the unilateral stuff, the bilateral stuff definitely benefits, whereas vice versa isn't always true. You can become very strong with a barbell without actually becoming that strong in the single leg stuff. And if you think about the human body, it is designed unilaterally. Like gait is a unilateral movement where our bones, joints, connective tissue, they're all centered around this unilateral walking pattern. So actually a lot of unilateral movements align with how the body wants to move better than just constantly hammering these heavy barbell lifts.
Yeah, when I think about unilateral work in general, and like the amount of like when you know you have one side weaker than the other, and so you're in a back squat and you can always feel yourself pushing through one side more than the other. Going into some single sided stuff makes it really easy to identify that imbalance, and then you can work on that. And so obviously you've picked out specific mechanics that are slightly skew with essentially with Chris, but like just the simplicity of one side being stronger than the other. So if you're going to bring up that weaker side and do some extra reps and stuff on your weaker side, overall your squat will hopefully balance out more without even then having some specificity in there of exactly what's wrong. And like when I think about like exercises that are going to improve my main barbell lifts using say squat, bench and deadlift, I'm going to be trying to think about what is a very similar exercise that has quite a close carryover. So when you're thinking about say bench press, you might be thinking about just dumbbell bench press, because then you've got the added addition needed for extra stability work. And at the end of the day, anyone that's done some heavy dumbbell work knows how much harder it is to press the same amount or anywhere near the same barbell load, just because of that increased demand of stability. And maybe with a deadlift, you might be doing something like, say, a reverse lunge with a more of a forward lean to get those, talking more conventional deadlift here, so more with a forward lean to get more glute and hamstring. So you're getting that unilateral strengthening on that one side. And then obviously we spoke about there with the split squat. I mean, it's in the name, a split squat, right? So you're hammering that single leg, and like you done it when you pull ups, didn't you? You done single arm pull up stuff, and you found your pull ups massively increased after that, didn't you?
Yeah, exactly. So when I was on the big single arm pull up drive, I think before I got into it, I could probably knock out like 10 to 15 strict regular pull ups, and I just went through this single pull up program cycle to work on that. And somebody asked me one day how many pull-ups I could do, and I hadn't done two-handed pull-ups for months, really. Or maybe I'd probably done them a handful of times in a year or two, and I retested, and I could do 25 pull-ups. And this is out of the blue, not working up towards it, just because I was so much more efficient, because my shoulders were so much more stable. Obviously, I developed a good amount of strength from single arm pulling, because my body weight on one arm is a lot bigger of a stimulus than spread across two. But pretty much everyone I've ever worked with from a movement mechanics perspective, PBs, once we add in some targeted unilateral work. Obviously, there's a lot of nuance around the specific way we do it for specific people, but I think by and large, almost everybody would benefit from having a bigger emphasis on their unilateral work and treating it more like main work rather than, accessory pieces because you should. If you went big on the unilateral work. If you did a unilateral A1 cycle, I would bet a lot of money that more people would PB their main lifts than wouldn't.
Yeah, I think it for most people. I think it would be the doubt in the back of their mind, like fuck, I'm not doing squats as my main lift. I'm going to be more tired when I go into them, and it'd be the lack of trust or the lack. Actually, no, I'm not going to say lack of trust. I'll say it's the lack of the ability to experiment and willing to see what's going to happen at the end, because I think most people think, oh, it takes so long to get strong, I can't waste any time by not doing the movement. And we're not saying to not do the movement. What we're saying is it might not have to be your number one exercise after you say warmed up or primed the body in whatever sense for your first exercise that you're going to do, that you're going to load up. It doesn't have to be a back squat. And like an example is yesterday, actually, when I was training. Normally, I have, because my priority at the moment has been some big barbell movements, and I have been focusing as them being my main lift. But I just felt a little bit too pumped from my warm up, so I couldn't front rack the bar properly. So I actually went into my second exercises first, which was like some floor pressing and some rows, and then went back to my push pressing, because then I could get into, because I lost that initial pump from my biceps and triceps, and I was able to then front rack the bar better. But I then felt my connection with the push presses was so much better, because I'd got into the exercise, and I felt that even though I wasn't as strong as I could have been, that was fine, but my movement just felt tighter. So I really enjoyed. It was a little bit of experiment yesterday that it just kind of happened because like it wasn't planned. But I think when I think about like you talking about doing the movement mechanics and like accessing positions that you say haven't normally accessed, is it's just you're going to have more of those light switches to turn on in those muscles, right? So normally, if we've spoken about this before, like where you have say access to say 6 generally, and the only time you're going to access all 10 potentially is you're trying to save a baby underneath a car type thing. But like generally, you're never going to get there because the cost is too high for the body. So if we can really maximize towards say 8 at the most, you're never going to get to 8 if you've never gone to those like dark little places in your glutes. Not those dark places, but like, you know, getting into that side of the hair and getting into the parts of your shoulders and your chest, because those areas. So when you're at the bottom of your squat and you're trying to drive out and you're thinking, fuck, I've only got 6 out of 8 to access at the moment. Like, just imagine if you had all 8, how much easier it would be to get out of the bottom of the squat. And like, it's when I remember adding certain movement mechanics to help me with my squats and my deadlifts, that helped me tons. And as you said there, most of your clients are PB'd, and that's not because they've suddenly just got stronger. They've just then got more muscle to use, which is then they've got stronger because they've got 8 lights to turn on rather than just their normal 6 or 5.
Yeah, exactly. The way I like to think about that is it's a better way of activating the main muscles that you're looking to use in the standard movement. And very often, for a lot of people, they will get better recruitment and engagement from those main movers in a unilateral exercise than they will in a bilateral exercise. So in terms of some practical ways to apply this, like Rob's done there, you can use it as like a primer to have a unilateral before a bilateral movement. But if you want to go whole hog and do a full unilateral cycle, you can make your main movement that you're looking to progress a unilateral movement and do that as your part A for your session. And if you have some nervousness of removing the standard bilateral barbell lift from your programming completely, do that as part B. So you could do heavy split squats, part A, progress it as you would do any normal main movement, give that your main time, energy, and focus, and then do your back off work with the bilateral lift. Some people call it, like bodybuilders might think of this as like a pre-fatigue, when you sort of target a smaller muscle group and then go into the compound lift afterwards. But I prefer to think of it as like a prime or an activation exercise where you get the main stimulus in there and then you just integrate it with the main pattern as the second part.
Yeah, because for me, when I think about doing, I said the pre-fatigue is, I think, a really that's the way I still think of it in my head, even though I'm more of a strength individual now. Is in like, I understand when you're pre-fatigued, just like I kind of said there when how yesterday's session I went into my push press pre-fatigued because I'd done my floor pressing and some rows. That I actually felt a bit better with it anyway. Not necessarily stronger, but I just had a much better connection because I'd warmed up. Everything was more switched on. I'd access positions on my pushing strength and my pulling strength. So my body as a whole was a lot more lit up, ready to do the main lift. Now, is that going to be the way I'm going to start that session? No, but that was just the way I started that particular session. But going forward, having some unilateral cycles is in saying, right, I'm just going to trust that that I will get stronger at the end of this. I'm going to make sure my back squat and whatever is going to be my B, but it's just going to be on a maintenance phase and maybe like a very small increase, maybe every 2 weeks, because I want to put all my eggs into the single unilateral work basically. One thing I would say is if you are going to do this, personally, I wouldn't do it on the squat, the deadlift, and the bench press if you're using those three as your strength markers. What I would do is maybe do it on the squat or the deadlift, so choose one or the other, and then the bench press. You could do it as an upper body and a lower body, just so you could kind of have a little bit more of a subjective review at the end, saying like, because if you're say using like reverse lunges as your like deadlift accessory piece, right, some heavy reverse lunges with more of a forward lean, and then is that going to carry over to your squat? Probably. It probably will carry over to your squat because again it access your glutes better, your hamstrings better. But then you won't know if your split squats have really been the main main improver there. So I would personally choose one you want to work on and see if it works, and then maybe do one upper body as well. What do you think?
Yeah, I think like that's a nice scientific approach that you're only changing one variable at a time, so you can be sure that that's having the effect. And the big caveat to this is that there are other aspects of the main lifts which are much harder to train in a unilateral movement. So in terms of the core stiffness or bracing, because you're only focusing on one leg, you're not going to be able to put as much total load on the bar. So for something like a deadlift, obviously you need your trunk to hold up against that heavy weight. And if you're only doing single leg deadlifts, you're going to miss out on that. So if you completely remove normal deadlifts, that's a big jump to get back to bilateral weights that you would be lifting. So that sort of phased approach is a good idea. But again, like if you do part A as unilateral and part B as the standard lift, you should be able to get close to that. But yeah, I think a lot of people would probably feel reticent to go whole hog on unilateral on all their movements, which is totally fair enough. So doing a cycle for doing heavy single leg squat cycle, then a heavy single leg hinge, push and pull, doing it like that is probably a more palatable way for people to introduce it to their training.
Yeah, and I think even like I'd say just for the scientific approach, because it's like if you do everything at once, you don't know what's working. And it's like the same as like, when someone starts out a dieting phase and they do cardio, they do lifting, they eat less, and it's like they probably try and sleep better, they drink less alcohol. It's like, what of those 5 things are actually helping you move the needle to losing weight? And then when you need to improve something, you don't know what it is that's worked. So like, I really would, if you are thinking, do you know what, I'm inspired by this and I do want to I'm going to go whole hog on on some unilateral work, pick one, or maybe pick upper and lower, like pick one or the other, and then see how you feel. Like, for instance, right now in my cycle, I've got some single, I've got barbell push press and I've got a unilateral dumbbell push press with a negative. So like, I'm getting very comfortable getting lower in the dumbbell, so I'm getting that strong movement pattern. But then I've also got some barbell work later in the week, so I've actually split it up, so not just in the one session. So I'm using kind of that unilateral work to help improve my barbell push press. Yeah, I'm just as I'm talking about this, I'm getting quite excited about maybe adding in a unilateral thing just to see how much it helps my squats. So let's move on to the next one. We've got low tone. This is something where even outside of the lifting sphere, most people are so tense in general. And like when we had Fergus on the podcast and we spoke about that level, how stressed everyone is day to day, and that they don't take into consideration their stress bucket as a whole, including their life stress, work stress, training stress. So like if you imagine if your muscles hold that all in, and this is before you then start to try and do any movement that takes speed and power, that you need to be loose to be able to flow through and be able to switch on at the right time. So like I guess you must have really noticed that the whole low tone thing when it comes to BJJ, because that is essentially, I can imagine when I've done a bit of wrestling, like it is just like I tighten up and I'm just trying to, and everything, and I'd get gassed fast, and it's just, and I know why, but it's because I'm just not proficient. It's not what I do, so I don't have any skill behind it. I'm just trying to use brute strength to basically outwork the other person, but it never works, because when you're just trying to outwork someone that knows how to move, they just play you until you're so gassed up they tap you out.
Yeah, exactly. So this one came to me from sparring in BJJ, where you do 6 minute rounds, and I would just be absolutely wrecked afterwards. And reflecting back on it is basically because I was doing a 6 minute max effort isometric and just trying to like lock somebody in position and just absolutely give nothing away positionally. So I'd get into whatever position I could and then just clamp everything to either try and stop them moving or stop them moving me. And yeah, the coach basically said, you need to relax, like you're trying too hard, and that's why you're burning out, because you shouldn't be gassing that hard after 6 minutes. And somewhere else I heard the advice for beginners basically being just need to learn to relax. You need to recognize which positions you don't need to be trying, and actually your ability to relax actually improves your ability to contract. Like a muscle that is always tense has nowhere to go. Like if you're, say you're using your grip and you're gripping as hard as you can't then grip harder again. So if you want to create movement, you've got nowhere to go. And yeah, it's very apparent in jiu-jitsu. If you have completely locked everything, you can't then add more force to try and move somebody to a different position. So once I started relaxing and realizing that in certain positions you didn't really need any effort, it's more about balance and just staying where you need to stay, then I started being able to roll with a lot less effort and being less gassed after the 6 minute rounds. And another situation where this really became apparent to me is I remember probably like 13 years ago, I had a golf lesson, a group lesson, and they were just teaching us the basics of setup. And one thing really stuck with me, and that was in terms of grip effort and grip strength. They said use a 6 out of 10 effort when you're holding the golf club. And the common mistake with beginners is that they start with a 10 out of 10 effort on the grip. And exactly the same principle in that if you're gripping as hard as you can't grip any harder. You can only lose grip strength as you hit the ball. So when you're striking the ball at impact, you want to make sure the club head doesn't move away from where the angle you want to hold it on. So if you can only relax the grip at impact, you're losing control at that important moment. Whereas if you're holding it 6 out of 10 and you hit the ball, you still have 4 out of 10 room to increase the level of grip strength and control that club head. So it's almost a counterintuitive thing in that by trying less, you actually create more force and more power. And to bring this to like a gym and training context, I think we get so caught up thinking that we need to be braced and activate this, squeeze that, and always generating maximum tension throughout all portions of a lift. And there is a time and place for that in bodybuilding if you're doing tempo stuff or you're trying to get certain muscle groups working better temporarily. But actually, to get the most out of your body from a performance perspective, the ability to use as little effort as possible to have the most output as possible is really the key to efficient and effective movement. So you can think of this as descending in a squat using just enough tension to control it. So you put yourself in the right position to then power out the bottom. You see this done beautifully by Olympic weightlifters, where they basically fall into the slot and bounce out. So they're almost completely relaxed, just guiding themselves down until the critical moment, and then it's 100% power and contraction to get out. So it's the ability to relax that predisposes them to contract as hard as possible. Whereas if they were squeezing everything as they descended into that position, they would have no room to add more contraction to power out. The other one that really jumps out at me is kipping in CrossFit. If you're doing kipping pull-ups, particularly butterfly pull-ups, if you're squeezing the bar as hard as you can, if you're tensing your arms, you're squeezing your core or your back, and everything's really rigid, you burn out way faster, and the kip motion is actually very jagged and not fluid and smooth. So if you look at the people who are really good at butterfly pull-ups, they basically have one sharp tug on the bar, and then they guide themselves around that cyclical movement, and it's actually very low effort, which is why people can do 40, 50, 60 plus reps of those compared to a handful of strict pull-ups. So I think in terms of how you can practically build this into your training, focusing more on rhythm, and like Chris Speed and Matt McInnes-Watson talk about this beautifully with their oscillatory movements, where you're sort of flowing into and out of positions without trying to force yourself into certain shapes, and you let the muscles be fluid and relaxed, and they will contract. Like when you get into the right position, they have to contract. The joints will force muscles to activate when they need to. And if you can allow the subconscious to learn those motor patterns more, they will become more fluid and actually more powerful in the long term. Your subconscious is incredible for figuring that sort of stuff out. And I think the other thing that I need to say is breath is the key metric to be aware of here. If you're holding your breath, you're probably trying too hard. If you can breathe through a movement, like if you're doing your plyometrics and you're holding your breath and bracing really hard, there's probably a big part of your body that is not allowing movement, that is not being fluid, which means you're actually missing out on muscle activation in those patterns.
Yeah, I think for me, one of the ways I've kind of been able to say relax through tension, essentially, when it comes to lifting, has been to just be present in the lift. I like to be aware of what I'm actually doing, because yes, I'm not thinking about glutes, hams, quads, knees, calves, this, that. I'm thinking squat. But I've gone through that movement pattern at moderate loads. I've understood what it should feel like. I understand as soon as I break from my hips and my knees where I want to kind of lower myself down into. And like you used the example of a weightlifter. So when you watch weightlifters, like high level weightlifters squat, the reason they can do that is because they've greased that groove of how to squat so many times that it's just second nature. They don't even think. So they do not need to be present anymore with their lift, because it's what they do. If you're trying to get into it, I'm not a fan of just dropping into the bottom of a hole and expecting your body to kind of know how to get yourself out, because you haven't spent enough time telling yourself what to do with load. And then normally the load overpowers you because you miss time, the refiring and the rebracing and that finding tension again. And I think one of the best ways to kind of find that, and I've found with clients as well, is like when you spoke about with those pliers, like getting yourself into that bottom position and understanding kind of how to bounce around in the bottom and get out of the hole, get out of positions, and doing it bilaterally, unilaterally, onto things, off of things, moving. Like it's that form of play, like we've spoken about before, that you don't think when to brace when you're, say, playing and doing stuff. And like you could be doing like an assault course, you're not thinking, oh, grab this, hold that, step onto that. You're just going to do it naturally because it's what your body wants to do and to perform the task at the best of its ability. As well, something like when I think about with the like with the low tone and like deadlifting, if you was trying to like lift the heaviest lift possible and you've already tightened up fully and your arms are slightly flexed and you're braced and everything's so tight, you probably won't even be able to reach the bar because you're so tight. And then if you do hold the bar, you'll notice, and this you'll see a lot of people pull their biceps because they're basically trying to hold the weight in their biceps, and their biceps can't potentially handle say 200 kilos, but their legs can and their grip can if they relax their arms. This is also why I'm not a fan of switch grip, but because I find with hook grip you can actually relax your arms and it's all in the hand. But for me, being able to relax and create tension at the same time, so it's in I've braced, I've held myself at the top, I've lowered myself down, quite relaxed, and then I've pulled the sack out, and then I've used all that weight in the bar to essentially to then find that pop out the hole. And that's that, because obviously coming from the floor, so it's, but yeah, I've found it a lot. I get you get put on blast, I think, when you don't know how to do something, because that's where, as you said there about you being all tight in BJJ, like if you're unsure of how to do something, you tighten up because you think it's going to be the best thing possible. And instantly when I think about playing golf myself, like my swing is 100% of the back, it's 100% of the front, and it's just I wonder how, when I then implement the 60 to 100, how much my swing will improve.
Massively. I think it's a natural tendency to try and get control over a movement is to tense up and to try and control every part of it, which that instinct I think is increased in a lot of gym training because of bodybuilding and mind muscle connection and tension and bracing. But normal movement is not like that. Sporting movements are not like that. So it's almost a sense of relinquishing some control and trusting your subconscious is going to figure it out. And going back to what you said about play, that's how the body naturally learns to move. That's how babies learn to crawl and then eventually to walk. They're just falling over in various different directions. They're not trying to over control it. And then subconsciously their proprioceptors learn what's too far and they learn how to bring you back. And before you know it, you're walking, then you're running. And the same learning process is occurring with all movements. But because we have this safety first, must do it right approach in the gym, we think that we can override the natural learning processes of fluid and efficient movement, which we can't. That's just physiology.
Yeah, I think it's because in the gym we have access to external load, and then when we start loading ourselves up, that's where then, like, say, the dangerous stuff kind of comes in, because this is then where people's ego will take over the actual where they should really be. Whereas if they had no idea of the load, and they would say the coach that was putting the load in on appropriate to them, and they were watching them go through the movement pattern and they were doing everything as per, they'd probably be completely fine. Because as long as the coach was proficient enough and then watching them and actually understanding how they're going, it's always better to slightly undershoot than overshoot. Because if you undershoot, you've got room, you've got room to progress. And it's like it's that doesn't then mean you don't want to lift some heavy shit and, like, push yourself. There is a time and a place for that, and I love that. That's what I love to do. So I'm not saying to not, but especially if you're trying to get better at something, err on the side of just being a little bit more chilled about it and understand, cool, I get to do this again next week. And if you're itching to move into it next week, so yes, I can't wait to get back to do more. Whereas if you're thinking, fuck, how the fuck am I going to get better next week? Like, I've got to find more. And then you're biting at the bit and just probably not going to end up in a good place. So speaking of that, it kind of flows nicely into the next one with minimal programming. Now, you put the notes here of, say, less but better. And as soon as I read that reminded me of our podcast that we did with Casper, where he spoke about, having bigger rests in between exercises, performing the exercises better, and getting more out of less work. And I think the minimal programming stuff comes in, it sounds a bit misleading, but I think the priority here is to understand what is, like, your A goal. What is it you're trying to work on, and make sure that you're doing the right thing for your A goal, and that then everything else might actually become a lot more minimal because you're focusing on one particular task and everything has to be kind of left on maintenance.
Yeah. So I think this is a classic situation of if you try to do everything, you don't end up doing anything well. And because we are now spoiled for choice with all the different ways that we could train, and everyone's got so many varied goals that they want to work towards, they can end up spreading themselves very thin and actually not making very much progress towards any of them. And this point was inspired from a listener question, actually, where they're a very good CrossFitter doing a generic program, but not feeling like their strength was developing as much as they wanted to. So they asked, should I add 531 Wendler's strength program on top to try and make up that strength deficit? And the reality is both of those programs are designed to be your whole training program. So if you only have so much time and recovery budget to allocate to the training that you're doing. So if you end up doing two programs, you're only able to give them 50% of the resources you would be if you could just commit to one of them. So the thing that I think is underrated in this regard is just doing the bare minimum for your goals. So if you are clear that you want to get stronger, how much other stuff are you willing to let go and not put time and energy into in pursuit of the main goal, keeping the main thing the main thing? And I think this speaks to a broader, more overall trend, is that everyone thinks they need to be emptying the tank every day and consistently wrecking themselves to make progress, when a lot of people would be surprised at how easy training can be to still yield results. And it's a bit of a mindset shift to think that you can leave the gym without crawling out absolutely exhausted, but have had a more productive session than that other person who is wrecked. We it's a false proxy to correlate fatigue at the end of a session with the quality of the stimulus on your body. Like if you've done a good strength session, you might actually feel not at all exhausted, whereas most people have this desire to completely empty the tank in every single session. And I would class that as obliterating rather than stimulating the body. You can do a lot of very high quality training and not necessarily be exhausted. Don't get me wrong, there is a time and a place to absolutely empty the tank and give it everything. But we want to focus those efforts in the areas where it really counts, where they really carry over to our goals, rather than just it's like the classic poor high intensity interval session where you do Tabata for 20 minutes. Like you cannot do high intensity Tabata intervals for 20 minutes because there's just too much high and not enough low to actually make it high. If you actually gave it your everything for an interval, there's no way you're able to recover that much. But people think it's high intensity, and it's actually just moderate intensity spread over a long period of time. We can apply that same logic to training overall. You can't do 16 sessions a week, all super high intensity, max effort, fast or heavy. You have to have the counterpoint in the easy training or just the full on rest and recovery to allow you to exert hard enough to get the stimulus. So, a huge amount of people probably could chop their training in half, but just give twice as much effort to the really meaningful sets that really drive the results. And the warning signs that this might be you is if your numbers haven't really gone up for a long time. You say you've got a really good program, you're doing everything right as far as you can tell, but you're still not able to nudge up the weights week on week. You're probably sailing too close to the wind and would benefit from just doing less, but making the work that you do better.
Yeah, I mean, like I think this, when we're talking about this, you can apply this to nutrition as well, because you think of the people that do really well on their nutrition, say Monday to Wednesday, Thursday, they might have a little bit of a cheeky little something on the side, and then they say, fuck it, Friday, Saturday, fuck it, and then Sunday, right, let's start again on Monday. And like, it's the same when it comes into the training. If you absolutely hammer yourself on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and then the national rest day of Thursday comes about, and then like you're thinking like, fuck Friday, like let's go, and I'm still feeling pretty fucked up from Wednesday session. It's like, just imagine if you could do say 3 sessions really good through the week on say Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and give everything in those sessions, and you each time you're back, you're like, I want to lift. I really want to lift, and you're going to get so much better, because it's like most of us have gone into the gym and just been like, fine, and once we start moving, we'll be all right. And you will be, and you'll get into it, and you'll be able to, and you might even PB. You'll be like, fuck yeah, it was a good session because I was just tight and tired. But just imagine if you kept doing that continually, you're going to burn out. And it's like, and it's not saying that you then need to do less in everything, but I think, as Ash said there, that if you're noticing things aren't progressing as they should, you might have to address this. And sometimes, as we spoke about in that Casper episode, it's like actually taking something out rather than adding stuff in, or it might have been in the Vergus episode, I can't remember. But like, it's because when we start to account for life stress as well, you realize that plays such a huge part, that your programming will need to adapt to what's going on in your life. And for me, it's like, when I work with a lot of, say, city clients still, and like their work stresses, I have to talk to them at the start of every single session. They're just like, hey, how's work been and stuff like that, because I'm trying to gauge what they're not going to tell me, because I'm essentially filling up their stress bucket in my mind and thinking, right, how much has this person got to give, and can they push? So they have the luxury of having a coach adjusting their stress bucket for them. But if they were just going to say, right, I'm going to follow this program, I need to get stronger, let's add on this like strength training on top of a program as well, so now I'm doing 2 programs in the same amount of time, like, you're going to fuck up. Something's going to fail, and it's most likely going to be your body, like, because your mind, because you'll be quite motivated, like, I want to get stronger, and it'll be just like, why is it not working, why is it not, there you go, there's my back gone, or my knee's gone. So it can be really easy to do, especially when you're highly motivated and you really want to get better. You want to do everything, but when I think it's when your body gives up on you for the first time, that's your opportunity to say, right, okay, let me actually review this. No, don't just let it give up on you and then say, right, let me try it again, because it's only going to get worse, and then you won't get those gains.
Yeah. Exactly. And I think it's easy to visualize this if you take it to the extreme, in that if you did a warm up and then 1 set of squats a week, and that was all your training, you'd be pretty confident that you could add more to that set every week. If you just say you started at 70%, did a 8 out of 10 AMRAP set, you would be pretty confident that you could progress that every single week if that's the only bit of training you did. So if you want to get a heavier squat, why are you doing anything else if you went super reductive on it? And the thought process, if you take it from that extreme, is just you're titrating or like adding in small bits to that baseline program of like, what are the real crucial must-haves in the program, because anything extra is just stealing resources from the thing that really counts. So before you add in the other 15 sessions or 15 movements of the week, just question, are they really necessary for me to make progress in the thing that I care about? Because the less things that are in there, the more likely I am to actually make progress in them.
Yeah, and I think, like, going back to then our very first point, which was then talking about going heavy on your unilateral work, is in like, that is, did you notice when we was talking about that we then said about your main lift will probably be more of a maintenance phase if you still incorporate it? That's because you have to understand, if you're pushing the boat somewhere, you're going to have to take off a little bit so you don't sink. So it's like, we have to understand it is about balance as much as we can. And when we are overreaching, it's fine, as long as we know that there's going to be a downturn, but you can't always stay in that overreaching phase. And just using this as the example where we were talking about the generic program and then adding in 5-3-1, like, you've got a coach that's written a generic program that is going to incorporate a level of strength, probably a level of like accessory work and some conditioning. And then you're going to add on a second strength program on top of their strength stuff. If you were going to do this, I would take out whatever strength they were telling you to do and then maybe keep whatever's left. But then I'd have to ask you, you're not really doing it, you're just cherry picking. So then it's like, should you really be doing that program? You probably should find a program that's more suitable for your goal at the moment, or talk to the coach and say, can this be tailored in a way that's better for my particular needs at the moment? But that's the thing in generic programming. You pay less, and it's not necessarily going to be to your specific needs, and it will probably get you far, but it won't get you exactly all the way.
Yeah, exactly. And to be fair to this listener, they did suggest taking up the strength stuff from their generic program. But like you say, that's difficult to manage because the generic program has had lots of other competing influences and desired stimuli for it. But I think, we've done a good job on making that point. Hopefully that it's unless you're an absolute elite competitor trying to get the most out of yourself in a short space of time, most people would benefit far more from being over recovered and doing the bare minimum than flirting with that overtraining line, because it's kind of a situation of one step forward, two steps back, in that if you do overreach, you might get injured, you might be burnt out. You actually have to slow down so much that you end up behind where you would have been if you'd just been plodding along long term. Because, if you're working within yourself, it's a lot easier to keep adding weight to the bar, to keep improving your times if you start within yourself. But if you start at 99%, then you're very close to your adaptation threshold straight away. So you basically make a small improvement or you break. Those are the only two options at that stage.
Yeah. And it's for instance, like how I've kind of run my current cycle with a lot of my training, how I've gone from tempo work to pause work to say cluster work to then full normal competition reps. So I've taken that loading down, and even I've been able to push to nearly 100% on all those lifts. That 100% is only going to be a small percentage of my main top lift. So my body is going to be deloaded. So for instance, my tempo squat, I think the max I got up to was I think it was 130 or 140 for a set of 8 with a 3-second negative and a 2-second pause. So it was pretty sure it was 130. But then compare that to my max back squat, which at the time was 250, but that's a massive deload and very submaximal. But that was 100% of what I could give of that particular movement. But the specificity was there, so I was able to deload the body and then deload across the board. Don't know why I come on to that one. I think my mind just went wandering there. But I was just thinking about
your next session.
Yeah, probably. But I think just overall the takeaways of today, I think thinking about your unilateral work beyond just those 5 kilo dumbbells, and think, actually, I can load them up. And if you want to take some inspiration, head over to Chris Speed's Instagram, k.speed. Check it out. He's been on the show. We'll probably get him back on as well. He said he's keen. So it'd be really cool to kind of dive into some of that stuff. So heavy unilateral work. Try to incorporate it, and why not give your unilateral work a bit of a priority in your training and see how much your bilateral stuff improves. Relax more and be fluid. That's definitely going to be the type of thing where, what film is it? It's all in the hips. It's all in the hips. Do you remember? It's
Happy Gilmore.
That's Happy Gilmore, because obviously he's got an absolute drive of a hit, and then what a film. But relax more and be fluid, and to save some of that energy from all that over tensing and put it actually into the execution of the movement. And as we finish off there with the minimal programming, do less but better. So I think we've kind of hammered all those points home. If you think there's some bits that we've missed out, maybe there are some other bits that are underrated that you think, do you know what, you guys should have said about this? This is what I do. I think it's underrated. Let us know. We'd love to hear from you. So you can head over to our Instagram at lunge.lift and tag us in your underrated movement or underrated thing that we're missing out on. As always, thank you very much for listening. We really do appreciate you every single week. And as always, a big thank you to our show sponsors, Wit Fitness and Hytro. You can head over to witfitness.com and use the discount code LL15 to save 15%, or head over to Hytro and use the code LL20 for 20% off any of their blood flow restriction apparel. But as always, thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you next week.
Cheers, guys.